example of your work, so thoughtfully laid out, so thoughtfully created from beginning to end. So thank you for sharing that with us today. This project was made possible through Ontario Culture Days, who's one of our partners. Ruth, who's the director there, had sent me an email and said, you know, we worked a bit in the past with Chelsea Smith, and she said, oh, you know, would you guys be interested in hosting this artist in residence? We have someone great who could come. And she hadn't actually said who it was. And I said, oh yeah, okay. And then she said, it's Natalie King. And I said, what? I follow her on Instagram. It was big to me. I was very excited. I was excited to find your work, and I was excited that we get to show together. Of course, the show is a bit of, I think, it's a bit of a homecoming for you. Natalie was like, a lot of her roots come from Timiskaming, so it's very special to be able to have you and your work here for the next 6 weeks. So without further ado, if you'd like to take us through.
Natalie King, Timiskaming First Nation, Hi everyone, I'm Natalie King. I'm a queer interdisciplinary First Nations artist. My family is from Timiskaming First Nation. I sit with the Bear Clan. Thank you to Melissa and everybody in Tag. It's been such a lovely experience. It's been really cool to come here and get to spend time with my dad and come back to our homelands and hear stories about the river and the goings on back in the 70s and everything that happened with my family, my mother and father. My mom is from Liskeard, and my dad's family is from Timiskaming First Nation, and so we have a lot of roots here and a lot of memories here, and it feels really cool to speak my language in my home territory. It's been overwhelming and wonderful in the best way. I created these works, so there's 7 stars. The way that I view the work is sort of 7 stars as 7 portals. I'm thinking a lot about 7 generations and how we should be in Anishinaabe culture. We're not just thinking about the generation that comes next, but we're thinking 7 forward, 7 back. And so each star represents something different in terms of the journey in my life. My grandfather's first language was Anishinaabe, and to me that really encapsulates a lot of sort of my research and also my material exploration in my work, and the things that I want to talk about is all coming back to this idea of this joyfulness, but also this idea of not just resilience, because I think that's sort of like the catch-all term, but really about what do we make of where we are now. And so each one sort of speaks to a different part of that. The work on the left there, it's called the Radial Space-Time Continuum. And it's a giant star braid, wrapped in red. And I mean, to me, that kind of encapsulates what the show is about. This idea of there is no such thing as time. I mean, in Anishinaabe culture, we're always talking about non-linear time. And this idea that, you know, my grandfather's language isn't gone, and it still lives in me, and I'm still speaking it, and it's sort of coming back in this circle, almost like this star portal. And so each one is also connected to different star stories, different ways of being and knowing. If you have any questions about the work, feel free to come up and ask me. Each one is very specific, but a lot of them are about returning to culture, returning to land. And thank you for everyone meeting me. I think that's it.
So as you might have noticed, we're a little bit informal.
Yes.
So we often, our artist talks are often really a big Q&A sort of session. Does anyone have a question that they don't mind posing in front of the crowd? Can you tell us a little bit about the, so actually I have 2 questions.
Yes.
And that this is not the expert, everyone who's here. So the first question was, when we filmed the show, and I've already told you 2 of our long-term volunteers, Algonquin Anishinaabeg is here with us today, and Diana who do a lot of very hard work to make it possible, such as Temiskaming Gallery. when we hung the show, we hung it in the order that we had received the labels in.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was, it felt intentional. And
Yes.
Like there was a story unfolding.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the final piece, actually? The sort of
This one?
yes.
Yeah. So this actually was the last one that I made. I had originally started with the one you see right there. Obviously, if we look at it, there's a bit of a resemblance, right? I'm playing with this idea of, so I'm queer, I've been in a relationship for 15 years, I've lived in Toronto for 15 years, and I sort of always grew up in like a very suburban, kind of insulated community. So it really felt like this expansion of my identity and consciousness sort of when I came to Toronto and to experience like other queer people and like life outside of like heteronormativity and all of these things. So it begins with sort of this idea of the star journey. But to speak to this one, I guess I would say it really, this idea of hair is something that I'm really drawn to. This idea that when we braid our hair, we're thinking good thoughts. We're also tying together like past, present, and future. I think there's a duality to a lot of the works as well. I'm not necessarily so hung up on this idea of saying things in the perfect, concise way that will be translated to a viewer. I think for me, I think it's about sort of like speaking to things that almost feel like they haven't been shared before. So something that I think a lot about is this idea of Anishinaabe cosmology and like we come from the stars and we come from the spirit world and when we leave our bodies go back into the spirit world and return to the spirit. So there's a lot of these sort of like glowing orbs almost in these pieces that kind of to me speak to spirit. That one, the yellow one in particular, is like the big manifestation of spirit. That one's called Radiant Child. So it's about like sort of like birth, life, and death. This one in particular, she's tied to this idea of mothers and mothering, and a lot of the female role models that I grew up with. And I think all of my best memories and all of the things that I feel like I've taken away, I've shared with women. So this felt like sort of like women in my life as well. She's sort of being held by her, right? She's like cradled inside the star. Yeah, modeling her. So she's physically like her hair is in the shape of a star. It's very like repetitive. Yeah. Question.
I've got a follow-up. So we spend a lot of time here at Temiskaming Art Gallery talking about what it means to be an Indigenous artist, what Indigenous art is. Oftentimes, the first thought that someone has when they think about Indigenous art is something tied to the land, something very, in the forest, those kinds of things. And I think we definitely see that imagery in your work, but what we also see are those man-made hot colors that remind you of urban life.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell us a bit about your palette.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it comes back to this idea of like, so I grew up outside of my community. I grew up in East Winnipeg. Yeah. And I didn't grow up within my community, right? So there's a little bit of this idea of bringing in that urban Indigenous element, and also it's kind of like a way of saying there's no monolithic way to show what Indigenous art is, even to show what who Indigenous people are. You can't distill it down to one specific thing and say this is what it is. I think there's a stereotype in people's minds, but then also like there's so many other facets to this identity, right? Like colonization has so much to do with why so many of us are mixed, and so many of us have these identities where we're white, like myself, and on my father's side, like Native. So, you know, we're not just all growing up in our communities too, we're also growing up in cities and the suburbs and rural areas too. And so, for me, it's kind of really important to show that it doesn't exist in sort of like a standardized little like woodland art, right? Like, and I love that stuff. But I mean, like, it doesn't all have to kind of look the same.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that everybody kind of takes from the show, right? Every identity is complex. You're not one thing and that's it. And that's the beauty of humans, I think. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I encourage all of you, if you have questions that you'd like to speak to Natalie about afterwards, to go up. She's going to be very friendly.
Yeah, I love to. Yeah.